this text, at least at first. Like I said, the book of Jude in the New Testament directly references 1st Enoch, and Enoch likely influenced the theology of the Gospels and the book of Revelation. The idea of the Son of Man, for example, which appears in the Gospel of Mark, shares theological similarities with 1st Enoch.
A fragment of leather no bigger than a man's hand sits under glass in Jerusalem. The lights are kept low. The temperature never changes. 2,000 years ago, someone copied words onto that skin in Aramaic, and then someone else hid it in a cave above the Dead Sea. When it was found, scholars read the lines and went quiet. The words named beings who came down from the sky. The words named the mountain where they swore an oath. And the words described a punishment so strange that, for a long time, almost no one wanted to talk about it out loud. That mountain is real. You can stand at its base today. It rises along the border between Lebanon and Syria, snow on its peaks for much of the year, and its name is Hermon. The ancient text says this is where everything began, not a fairy tale, a location, a coordinate, a place with roads leading to it. This is the strange thing about the book of Enoch. It does not read like a myth made up to scare children. It reads like a report. It names the beings. It names the leader. It describes what they taught, where they were chained, and how long they would stay there. And the men who wrote it believed every word. For centuries, this book was treated as lost. It vanished from most Bibles. It was pushed to the edges of religious memory, kept alive in only one corner of the world, while the rest of the church acted as though it had never existed. But the story it tells refuses to stay buried. It surfaces in the New Testament. It surfaces in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It surfaces in the questions people are still asking right now. Hi viewers, before we go any deeper, tell me in the comments, do you believe some ancient knowledge was hidden from us on purpose? Just type yes or no. I read every single one. Here is the part that should stop you cold. The book of Enoch does not describe these beings as free. It describes them as bound, chained, pressed into the dark places of the earth and sealed there to wait. The title calls them the Black Watchers, but black does not mean their color. It means their condition, buried in gloom, cut off from light, held in the deep until a day of judgment that, according to the text, has not yet come. And that raises a question no one has been able to fully close. If the Watchers were chained for what they taught humanity, then the danger was never really the beings themselves. The danger was the knowledge, and knowledge does not stay in a chain. A single fragment at Qumran hints that this forbidden knowledge survived, that it was written down, copied, and carried forward by hands that knew exactly what they were holding. The question is, who decided the rest of the world should never see it? The work happened in basements and back rooms, long tables, bright lamps, thousands of broken pieces of ancient parchment spread out like a shattered window, and a small group of scholars trying to fit them back together. This was the 1950s. The Dead Sea Scrolls had been pulled from caves near a ruin called Qumran, and among the fragments were pieces of a book that most of the Western world had assumed was gone forever. The Book of Enoch, in the original Aramaic, older than many of the copies anyone had ever studied. For most of Christian history, this book existed in only one complete form, and it survived in one place, Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church had kept it inside their Bible for more than 1,000 years, while the rest of the world let it fall away. Western scholars first got their hands on the full Ethiopic text in the late 1700s, when a traveler named James Bruce carried copies back from Africa. Until then, much of Europe knew Enoch only as a name, a rumor, a book everyone mentioned and almost no one had read. Then the caves opened, and the rumor became ink and skin. Picture the contrast. A person opens a standard Bible to Genesis chapter 6. They read a few short verses about the sons of God, the daughters of men, and the giants that were on the earth in those days. 4 sentences, maybe 5. The text does not explain who the sons of God were. It does not explain how the giants came to be. It states the facts and then moves on toward the flood, leaving a hole in the middle of the page.
If we come back to Northern Europe, for example, I mean, the last place on Earth that I would look for the remains of a lost civilization is Northern Europe. Because Northern Europe was a frozen wilderness during the Ice Age, and any lost civilization worth its salt would not have focused a lot of effort on Northern Europe.
The book of Enoch walks straight into that hole. Where Genesis says almost nothing, Enoch says everything. It names 200 beings who descended. It names their leaders. It records the oath they swore and the mountain they swore it on. It describes the children they fathered and the ruin those children brought. The same event that Genesis covers in a whisper, Enoch tells in full voice, with detail after detail after detail. That is what makes the book so hard to dismiss. It does not feel like decoration added later. It feels like the missing pages of a story the Bible only summarized. The men translating those Aramaic fragments at Qumran were not reading entertainment. They were reading what an entire ancient community had treated as sacred truth. The people of Qumran copied Enoch carefully. They kept multiple versions. They placed it beside the books we now call Scripture, as if it belonged there. And as the translators worked, the names kept rising off the parchment. A mountain, a place of binding, a leader of the descent. The pieces pointed somewhere specific, somewhere on the map, and the closer they read, the clearer it became that this was not a story about the distant past alone. The text seemed to be warning that what the Watchers started had never fully ended. It begins with an oath sworn in fear. According to the book of Enoch, 200 of these beings, called Watchers, looked down at the daughters of men and made a choice. Their leader speaks first. His name in the text is Semjaza, and he is afraid. He tells the others that he alone will be blamed for the plan, that he alone will pay the price. So he demands that they all swear together, binding themselves by a curse, so that no one can back out and leave him to carry the guilt. They climb a mountain to do it. Enoch names it plainly, Mount Hermon. The text even plays on the name because the Hebrew root tied to Hermon carries the sense of a curse or a ban, the very thing they swore upon it. 200 beings standing on a cold peak, binding themselves to a plan they already know is forbidden. Then they come down, and the teaching begins. This is the heart of the warning, and it is sharper than any monster. The Watchers do not just father children with human women. They hand humanity knowledge it was never meant to hold. One of them, named Azazel, teaches men how to make swords, knives, shields, and armor. He teaches the craft of war. He teaches metalwork that becomes weaponry. The text says he showed people how to beat metal into blades and how to make the tools of killing. But it does not stop at war. Azazel teaches women how to paint their faces and adorn themselves. Other Watchers teach the cutting of roots and the power of plants. They teach the reading of the stars, the signs of the sun and moon, the secrets of the sky, enchantments, sorcery, knowledge after knowledge poured into human hands that were not ready for it. And the world changes fast. Their children are not ordinary. The text calls them giants born of beings who never should have crossed into human life. These giants grow beyond all natural size and they consume everything. They eat the harvests, they eat the animals, and when there is nothing left, the text says they turn on humanity itself. Violence floods the earth. The ground is soaked in blood. The whole creation groans under the weight of what the Watchers set loose. This is where the story stops being old. Genesis chapter 6 says the same thing in its own short way. There were giants in the earth in those days, men of renown, and the wickedness of man was great. 2,000 years later, the New Testament book of Jude points back to it, warning about angels who did not keep their proper place. The thread runs from Enoch through Genesis into the Christian scriptures, refusing to break. So here is the question that should keep you watching. The giants died. The flood came, but the knowledge the Watchers taught, the war, the sorcery, the secrets, did any of that drown with them? Or did it survive the water, hidden in human memory, waiting to be picked up again? The punishment is the strangest part of the whole account. Heaven hears the cry of the earth. 4 named beings step forward in the text: Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel.
considered to be canonical, that has been challenged by the group of scrolls that were kept at Qumran, because they had things like the books of First Enoch, or what came to be known as Ethiopic or First Enoch, canonical in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, or the Book of Jubilees.
They look down at the ruin and they carry the plea of humanity upward, and the order that comes back is precise. It is not vague. It reads almost like a sentence handed down in a courtroom. Raphael is told to seize Azazel, bind him hand and foot, cast him into the darkness. The text names the place, Dudil, a location described as a place in the desert where Azazel is thrown into an opening in the ground, covered with rough and jagged rocks and sealed in total darkness. He is to stay there, the text says, until the great day of judgment, when he will be cast into the fire. Read that again. He is not destroyed. He is buried alive in the dark and left to wait. The other watchers receive a similar fate. They are bound beneath the hills and valleys of the earth, locked away for 70 generations, held until the day of their final judgment. This is the truth hiding inside that dramatic title. The Black Watchers are not black in skin or shadow. They are black in condition, beings of light thrown into the deepest dark, sealed under stone, cut off from the heaven they came from. The New Testament keeps this exact image alive. The book of Jude, in its 6th verse, speaks of angels who did not keep their first estate, kept in everlasting chains under darkness, reserved for judgment. The second letter of Peter, chapter 2, says God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down, delivered into chains of darkness, held until judgment. 2 short passages in the Christian Bible. Both describe beings chained in the dark. Both sound exactly like Enoch. And here is where many scholars grow uncomfortable. To take Jude and Peter at their word is to admit that the writers of the New Testament knew the Watcher's story. They were not inventing something new. They were pointing back to a book that most modern Bibles do not even include. That fact alone has made some readers nervous for a very long time, because it suggests the early church accepted things that later authorities chose to leave out. There is a deeper unease, too. It is the moral weight of the story. The Watchers were punished not only for crossing a line, but for teaching, for giving knowledge. The whole account treats certain knowledge as something dangerous in itself, something that can damn the teacher and ruin the student. That idea cuts against everything the modern world believes. We are taught that knowledge is always good, that more information is always progress. Enoch says the opposite. Enoch says some knowledge wounds the world. So if the punishment was for the knowledge, then chains around the teacher were never the whole solution. A chain can hold a being. It cannot hold an idea. And that leaves one cold possibility hanging in the air, one that grows heavier the more you sit with it. The scholars did not stay silent for long, and when they spoke, they did not agree. When the Dead Sea Scrolls came to light, the Enoch fragments forced a hard fact into the open. The earliest known pieces of this book were found among the most carefully guarded religious writings of an ancient Jewish community. These were not the scribbles of outsiders. The people of Qumran copied Enoch in multiple manuscripts. They kept it close. They treated it with the same care they gave the books of Moses. That alone told researchers that Enoch was not some late forgery. It was old and it was honored. Some scholars met this with open curiosity. They saw a window into how ancient people read Genesis, how they filled its silences, what they feared and believed. Others met it with deep skepticism, insisting the book was a later legend dressed up as ancient revelation. The arguments were sharp. The dating was debated line by line. But over time, even the skeptics had to admit one thing. The Book of Enoch was being read, copied, and respected long before the time of Jesus. It was part of the air that the earliest Christians breathed. Then comes the harder question. If Enoch was so respected, why did it nearly disappear? The answer involves councils and decisions made centuries after the fact. As the early church worked out which books belonged in Scripture, Enoch fell on the wrong side of the line for most of the Christian world. It was quoted directly in the book of Jude, which made the exclusion stranger, not simpler. How does a book get quoted as authority in the New Testament and then get pushed out of the very Bible that quotes it.
One is that it's interesting that we did find virtually all of the books of the Hebrew Bible, the Jewish scriptures, or the Christian Old Testament at Qumran. The only one we didn't find for sure is the book of Esther.
That contradiction has never had a clean answer. In the East, the choice went the other way. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church kept Enoch inside its Bible and never let go. While Western Christianity treated the book as something close to forbidden, an entire ancient church preserved it as scripture, generation after generation, for well over 1,000 years. The same text, two completely opposite verdicts. One world buried it, the other world guarded it. That split is where the suspicion grows. Some readers look at the gap and see ordinary history, books rising and falling in importance over time. Others look at the same gap and ask a darker question. Was Enoch set aside because it was doubtful, or because it said too much? Because it named the beings? Because it described the knowledge and the punishment in detail that made later authorities uneasy? Notice what the book of Jude actually does. It borrows from Enoch. It echoes the chained angels. It even references a prophecy attributed to Enoch by name, but it does not retell the whole story. It uses the image and leaves the rest in shadow, as if pointing at a door without opening it. The fuller account was already being pushed to the edges, even as its echoes were written into scripture, which forces the real question into the light. If a book quoted by the New Testament could be quietly removed from most Bibles, then what else was left out? What other ancient writings named things that powerful people decided you were better off never reading? And of everything that was set aside, how much of it still sits in obscure manuscripts and locked collections, waiting for someone to ask the right question? A blade, that is where it starts. According to the book of Enoch, the very first thing the Watchers taught was how to kill. Azazel showed humanity how to make swords and knives, shields and breastplates. He taught the working of metal into weapons. Before this, the text suggests, people did not know these things. After it, the ground filled with blood. One lesson. That is all it took to change the human story. Sit with that idea, because it is the moral engine of this entire account. The danger was not only the size of the giants. The danger was the gift. Knowledge handed to people who had no wisdom to carry it. And once a thing like that is taught, it cannot be untaught. Think about how strange this is to a modern ear. The world today treats knowledge as a pure good. More information, more progress, more power, always better. We celebrate the breaking of every limit. But Enoch tells a story where breaking the limit is exactly the crime. Where some doors, once opened, cannot be shut. Where the teacher is punished as harshly as the act itself. The text lists the lessons one by one. Weapons of war, the painting of faces and the making of ornaments, the cutting of roots for power, the reading of the stars and the signs of the heavens, enchantments and spells. Each one is knowledge. Each one is presented not as a blessing but as a wound. The Watchers did not free humanity. They armed it, decorated it, and then watched it tear itself apart. This is where the ancient story reaches across time and touches a nerve. Every generation discovers some new power it is not ready to hold. Every age learns to build something it cannot fully control. The pattern in Enoch is not really about angels. It is about what happens when capability outruns conscience. When people can do a thing long before they understand whether they should. And the Bible itself keeps the giant thread alive past the flood. In Genesis chapter 6, the Nephilim are on the earth before the waters come.
One, we had the gods walking amongst us. The gods, while they were walking amongst us, both before the flood and then again after the flood, created offspring with human females. And then polytheism with the female goddesses, because they can take a gender when they take a form.
But then in the book of Numbers, chapter 13, the spies sent into Canaan come back terrified. They report a land filled with people of enormous size. They say they saw the descendants of giants, and that next to them, they felt like grasshoppers. The flood was supposed to end all of that. Yet the report in Numbers says the giants somehow were there again. How? The text does not fully explain, and that silence is the open wound. If the corruption was wiped out by the flood, why does it appear again on the far side of it? Either the memory survived or something else did. Which leaves a question that refuses to sit still. If the knowledge of the Watchers outlived the giants and the giants somehow outlived the flood, then where exactly did all of it go? Into legend, into ruins, into the ground itself, in places we can still walk today. The mountain is still there. That is the part people forget. Mount Hermon has not moved. It still rises on the border between Lebanon and Syria, still wears snow, still stands exactly where the book of Enoch said the Watchers swore their oath. The valleys are still there. The land of Bashan, the region the Bible tied to giants and to a king named Og who slept in an iron bed of enormous size, is still on the map. You can drive through it. The story is ancient. The geography is present tense. That is what makes this account so hard to file away as a fairy tale. It is anchored to real dirt, real stone, real coordinates that a person can visit. And in recent years, that physical reality has pulled the whole subject out of dusty libraries and into living rooms across America. You have heard the conversations. On long podcasts that millions of people listen to, hosts and guests argue for hours about lost civilizations, about advanced knowledge that may have existed before recorded history, about catastrophes that wiped the slate clean. Joe Rogan has hosted these debates again and again, letting researchers make the case that humanity's true story is older and stranger than the textbooks admit. The actor and director Mel Gibson has spoken publicly about ancient texts and the spiritual battles described in Scripture, drawing huge attention to subjects the mainstream once ignored. Whatever you think of these voices, notice what they prove. The hunger is real. Millions of people sense that the official version of human history has gaps in it, and they want those gaps explained. The Book of Enoch sits right in the middle of that hunger. It is an ancient text that claims to explain a gap the Bible itself left open. Here is where you come in. Pause for a second and ask yourself honestly, when you read that giants appear in the Bible both before and after the flood, do you think that is symbolism, or do you think something physical is being described? Drop your honest answer in the comments. There are no wrong answers here, only honest ones, and your view might be exactly what makes someone else stop and think. Because this is the strange power of the Watcher's story. It will not stay in the past. It keeps surfacing in modern debates, modern podcasts, modern arguments about who we are and where we came from. The text was written thousands of years ago, yet it speaks directly to the question people are shouting about today. What if the human story has missing chapters? What if some of those chapters were removed on purpose? And if the land is still here, and the mountain is still here, and the names are still here, then the next question is the most physical one of all. Has anyone ever dug into these places and found something that the ancient writers would have recognized? The stones do not match the story we were taught. Across the lands tied to the Watchers and the giants, the ground holds structures that are hard to explain. In the region of Bashan and the Golan, there sits a massive ancient monument made of tens of thousands of tons of stacked basalt rock, arranged in great circles. Its local name in Hebrew translates roughly to the Wheel of Giants. No one is certain who built it, or exactly why, or how a people thousands of years ago moved that much stone by hand. Archaeologists study it. They date it to a period long before the great empires we read about in school. And the name the locals gave it, the Wheel of Giants, points straight back to the old traditions of an oversized race that once lived in that land. This is the pattern across the ancient world. Enormous stones, cut and stacked with a precision that seems to outmatch the simple tools we assume those people had. In Lebanon, near Baalbek, there are foundation stones so massive that moving them would challenge heavy machinery even now. The mainstream explanation is human ingenuity, ramps, ropes, and thousands of laborers, and that may be the full answer. But it is not hard to see why people standing in the shadow of those stones.
The opening scene in the Emerald Tablets, Thoth says that the temples were rising up out of the mud, that the fountains had completely covered the land. We're talking about a global flood, and that people who survived in caves were coming out of the caves.
Start asking whether the old stories of giants were trying to explain something they actually saw. This is the honest tension at the heart of biblical archaeology. The mainstream reading is careful and cautious. It explains the megaliths through ordinary human effort and warns against jumping to wild conclusions. The alternative reading looks at the same sites, holds them next to the texts about giants and watchers, and asks whether the ancient writers were describing real builders of real size. Both sides are looking at the very same stones. They simply refuse to read them the same way. And there is the matter of the bed of Og. The Bible, in Deuteronomy chapter 3, pauses to mention something oddly specific. King Og of Bashan had a bedstead made of iron, and it measured roughly 13 feet long and 6 feet wide. The text presents this as a real object, a thing that could be measured, a relic that people of that time could go and see. Why would Scripture record the exact dimensions of a bed unless someone believed it mattered, unless the size itself was the point? So much of this remains unsettled. Some sites in the region sit in zones torn by conflict and politics, hard to reach, hard to excavate, sometimes closed off entirely. The full story of what lies beneath that ground has not been told, partly because the world has not been able to safely dig it, which raises the uncomfortable thought that never quite goes away. If some of these places remain off limits, unexcavated, locked behind borders and barbed wire, then what might still be waiting in the soil? And is it possible that some of what has already been found was quietly set aside because it did not fit the story we agreed to tell? Strip away the giants for a moment. Strip away the stones and the buried valleys. Look at what the story is actually about. At its core, the book of Enoch is a warning about power. It tells of beings who had every advantage, knowledge, ability, a place in the heavens, and who used all of it to cross a line they were never meant to cross. They did not fall because they were weak. They fell because they were strong and they used their strength without wisdom. That is the lesson buried under every dramatic detail. Power without wisdom is not a gift, it is a trap. This is why the story has survived for thousands of years. Not because people are obsessed with monsters, but because the warning keeps coming true. In every age, human beings gain some new ability before they have the maturity to handle it. We learn to split the atom. We learn to rewrite the code of life. We learn to build machines that can think. And each time, the same ancient question returns. Just because we can, does that mean we should? The watchers in the text are not punished for being curious. They are punished for what they did with what they knew. They took knowledge that could heal and turned it into weapons. They took beauty and turned it into vanity. They took the secrets of the sky and turned them into manipulation. The knowledge itself was not the crime. The crime was using it to corrupt instead of to bless. There is something deeply human in that. Every person alive holds some kind of power. Words that can build up or tear down. Choices that can protect or harm. Knowledge that can serve others or serve only the self. The story of the Watchers is a giant mirror, showing the same struggle at a cosmic scale that every one of us faces in a smaller, quieter way. And here is the weight of it. The ancient writers were not telling this story to entertain. They were trying to warn the generations that came after them. They believed that what a person does with knowledge and power echoes far beyond their own life. They believed that some choices ripple forward for 70 generations, or longer. They were trying to hand down something they thought the future could not afford to forget. Which forces a hard look backward at our own story. How much of human history has been shaped by people who held great power and used it without wisdom? How many of the wounds we still carry as a species trace back to knowledge that came too soon, into hands that were not ready? The Watchers may be an ancient image, but the pattern they represent has never once left the human race. The chamber is still sealed. That is where this ends and where it refuses to end. According to the book of Enoch, Azazel still lies in the darkness of Dudil, covered in rough stones, waiting for a day of judgment that the text says has not yet arrived. The other watchers are still bound beneath the hills, held for their appointed time. The book never describes them being released and never describes them being destroyed. It leaves them there, waiting, in the present tense. As you read this, the ancient account insists the sentence is still being served. And the mountain is still standing. The valleys are still there. The manuscripts still sit under glass and inside locked collections. Some of them studied, some of them barely touched, some of them in places too dangerous to reach. The knowledge the watchers were said to teach, the working of metal into weapons, the reading of the stars, the bending of nature to human will, did not vanish. It became the foundation of the world we live in right now. So the real question was never about monsters chained in a desert. The real question is the one that has followed humanity since Genesis chapter 6 first let that strange sentence breathe and then moved on. Where do the consequences of forbidden knowledge still ripple today? In our weapons, in our ambitions, in every power we reach for before we are ready to hold it. The Bible left a silence. The book of Enoch tried to fill it. The New Testament in Jude and in 2 Peter kept the image alive, refusing to let it die. From an ancient mountain through buried manuscripts into the arguments people are having this very week, the story has traveled thousands of years to reach you, and it still ends on a question instead of an answer. So tell me below, after everything you have heard, do you believe the knowledge of the watchers truly drowned in the flood, or do you believe it is still moving through the world right now, in forms we no longer recognize? Share your honest thoughts in the comments. Because someone scrolling past tonight needs to read exactly what you are about to write. If the hidden roots of sacred history pull at something in you, something the ordinary version of the story never satisfied, then subscribe and turn on notifications, because this channel goes where the textbooks stop. The Nephilim, the lost books, the buried archaeology, the forgotten traditions, and the questions about where humanity truly came from. We are only beginning to open these doors. Because the next text we examine was hidden for a reason. It names a place even older than Hermon, and what it claims about the days before the flood is something most Bibles never let you read. The chamber stays sealed, the mountain stays silent, and the question stays with you tonight, long after the screen goes dark.